The living room was quiet, save for the rhythmic hiss and clank of Tom's latest masterpiece. The gray cat stood hunched over his creation, his whiskers twitching with a manic glee that bordered on madness. It was a machine unlike any he'd built before, a towering monstrosity of rusted metal and spinning blades, steam puffing from its joints like the breath of some mechanical beast. Gears whirred, chains rattled, and at its heart, a massive weight dangled precariously, ready to drop. This wasn't just another trap for Jerry. This was the end game. Tom's yellow eyes gleamed as he tightened the final bolt, imagining the smug little mouse flattened into a pancake at last. Jerry appeared right on cue, as if summoned by Tom's obsession. The mouse sauntered into view, nibbling on a wedge of Swiss cheese, his tiny paws leaving faint prints on the polished floor. Tom's grin widened, stretching his face into a caricature of itself. Too many teeth, too much desperation. He yanked a lever, and the machine roared to life. Blade spun in a blur, slicing the air with a high-pitched whine. The weight creaked upward, chains groaning under its bulk. Jerry froze, his beady eyes darting to contraption, then back to Tom. For a moment, it seemed like the plan might work. The mouse darted forward, and Tom cackled, slamming a button that sent the weight plummeting. But Jerry was too fast, always too fast. With a flick of his tail, he vanished into a mouse hole no bigger than a coin, leaving only a mocking squeak behind. The weight crashed down, missing its mark by inches, and the machine shuddered violently. Tom's laughter choked into a gasp as a blade swung off course, slicing through the air toward him. He scrambled back, paws slipping on the floor, but the machine had a mind of its own now. A chain snapped, whipping across the room like a living thing, and wrapped around Tom's leg. He yowled, clawing the ground as it dragged him toward the spinning maw. The first cut was quick. A blade nicked his tail, shearing it off in a spray of gray fur and crimson ink. Tom's scream was cartoonishly shrill, but the pain was real, sharp, and wet. He twisted, trying to free himself, but the machine was relentless. Another blade caught his arm, carving through muscle and bone with a sickening crunch. His paw flopped to the floor, still twitching, as if it hadn't realized it was severed. Steam scalded his face, blistering his fur into blackened patches in the weight. Oh, the weight. Swung back into view, now smeared with his own blood. Tom's eyes bulged, wide and glassy, as the machine pulled him deeper. He saw it all in slow motion. The gears grinding, the blades whirring, the weight descending like a guillotine. He clawed at the air, his remaining paw leaving streaks of red on the floor. But there was no escape. The weight hit first, flattening his torso with a wet splat that echoed through the house. His ribs cracked like dried twigs, and his breath burst out in a gurgling wheeze. Then the blades descended, a chorus of steel singing his doom. They diced him into ribbons, legs, arms, head, until he was nothing but a pile of quivering chunks, a grotesque parody of the cat he'd been. For a moment, there was silence. The machine sputtered to a stop, steam curling lazily into the air. Tom's eyes, still attached to a mangled scrap of his face, stared blankly at the ceiling. Then the world faded to black, a void so deep it swallowed even the memory of light. He was dead, finished, or so he thought. But something stirred in the darkness. A faint sound, a whistle, cheerful and familiar, cutting through the emptiness like a knife. Tom's consciousness flickered, and he felt himself falling, tumbling into a place that wasn't the quiet grave he'd expected. The air grew thick, pulsing with rhythm he couldn't name. And when his eyes snapped open again, he wasn't in the living room anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere worse. The whistle grew louder, and Tom's shredded body trembled. Jerry was waiting. Tom's eyes fluttered open, his body aching as if it had been stitched back together by clumsy, invisible hands. He was whole again, or mostly whole. His fur was patchy, his tail a jagged stump, and his paws trembled with a lingering soreness that pulsed like a heartbeat. He blinked, taking in his surroundings. The living room, but not as he knew it. The furniture loomed impossibly tall, the sofa mountain, the coffee table plateau. The air buzzed with strange, electric hum, and the shadows stretched too long, curling like tendrils across the floor. Tom shrank back, realizing he was tiny, smaller than Jerry had ever been, his claws barely scraping the wood beneath him. A shadow fell over him, vast and oppressive. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. Jerry stood there, but not the Jerry he knew. This Jerry was a giant, his body elongated and warped, his legs bent at odd angles like a spider's. His eyes were black voids, glistening wetly, and his mouth stretched into a grin that split his face in two, revealing rows of jagged, cartoonish teeth. In one paw, he held a hammer, Tom's hammer, the one he'd used in a dozen failed traps. But now it was enormous. Its head pulsating as if alive, veins of ink throbbing beneath its surface. Jerry tilted his head, and a low, distorted chuckle rumbled from his throat. Tom bolted. His tiny legs churned, skittering across the floor as the hammer swung down. The impact shook the room, splintering the wood where he'd stood a heartbeat before. Shards flew, one slicing his ear, and he yowled, stumbling over a rug that now felt like a forest of fibers. Jerry's laughter grew louder, a warped echo of the playful squeaks Tom once hated. Now a sound that clawed at his mind. He darted under the sofa, his chest heaving, but the shadow followed. The hammer crashed again, splitting the couch in half, stuffing bursting out like guts spilling from a wound. There was no hiding. Tom scrambled toward the table, his claws slipping on the polished surface as he climbed. He glanced back. Jerry was closer, his grin wider, his eyes unblinking. The hammer rose, and Tom leapt just as it smashed down, flattening the table into a pancake of splintered wood and bent nails. He landed hard, rolling across the floor, his ribs creaking from the impact. Above him, Jerry loomed, a towering nightmare, and something new glinted in the air. A big anvil, the kind Tom had dropped on himself 100 times. It hovered, defying gravity, then plummeted. Tom dove, but not fast enough. The anvil caught his tail, pinning him to the ground with a sickening crunch. Pain shot through him, raw and real, not the fleeting sting of a cartoon gag. He clawed at the floor, dragging himself forward, but the anvil's weight held firm, grinding his bones to dust. Jerry stepped closer, his massive paw tapping the ground, and raised the hammer again. Tom's scream was cut short as the blow landed, flattening him into a smear of gray fur and red ink. His body popped like a balloon, splattering across the room. Yet the pain didn't stop. He felt every piece of himself, every torn shred, and then the pieces began to move. They slithered back together, reforming with agonizing slowness. His legs twisted backward. His spine snapped into place. His eyes bulged as they reattached to his skull. He was whole again, but wrong. His fur matted with blood, his limbs trembling uncontrollably. Jerry's laughter filled the air, a cacophony that drowned out Tom's whimpers. The hammer rose once more, and Tom ran, his deformed body lurching with every step. The chase was endless. Each blow crushed him, each reformation warped him further, until he was a shambling wreck, a parody of the cat he'd been. And through it all, Jerry's black eyes watched, unblinking, as if savoring every moment of the inverted hunt. Tom staggered across the warped living room, his body a grotesque patchwork from the endless chase. His legs bent at unnatural angles, his fur clumped with drying ink and blood, and one eye dangled loosely from its socket, swaying with each lurching step. Jerry's towering silhouette lingered in the distance, the hammer resting on his shoulder, his grin a silent promise of more torment. Tom's chest heaved, his breath ragged. He needed an escape, and he escaped, his gaze locked onto it. The mouse hole in the baseboard, a familiar black circle no bigger than his paw. In life, it had been Jerry's sanctuary, a mocking refuge. Now it was Tom's only hope. He dragged himself toward it, his claws scraping the floor, leaving trails of red behind. The hole pulsed faintly, its edges rippling like liquid. But Tom didn't care. He squeezed his head inside, the darkness swallowing him, cool and damp against his battered face. His shoulders followed, then his torso, the hole stretching unnaturally to accommodate his broken form. For a moment, he felt relief until the walls tightened. They weren't wood or plaster. They were warm, slick, alive. The hole shuddered, and a low, wet growl rumbled from its depths. Before he could pull back, teeth erupted from the edges. Cartoonish, oversized molars that gleamed with a sickly yellow sheen. They clamped down on his hind legs, grinding through fur and flesh with a slow, deliberate crunch. Tom screamed, thrashing as the jaws dragged him deeper. The walls pulsed harder, slick with a slimy film that burned his skin, and the teeth chewed relentlessly, shredding his legs into ribbons. He clawed at the tunnel, but his paws sank into the fleshy surface, which oozed black ichor that smelled of rot and ink. The hole wasn't an exit. It was a mouth. He tumbled downward, swallowed whole, landing in a cavernous sack that quivered like a living stomach. The air was thick, humid, and the walls glowed faintly, revealing pools of bubbling acid that shimmered with an oily sheen. Tom tried to stand, but his legs were gone, replaced by stumps that twitched uselessly. The acid splashed upward, searing his fur, melting it into a bubbling mess that sloughed off in clumps. He howled, dragging himself away, but the stomach contracted, tilting the floor and spilling him into the pool. The liquid ate through him, dissolving his skin, his muscles, until he was a writhing skeleton held together by threads of cartilage, yet still alive, still feeling every second of it. Then the reconstruction began. The acid thickened, molding around him like clay, rebuilding his body with sickening snap and pop. His legs regrew, bent backward like a spider's, his fur patchy and dripping with slime. His dangling eye sank back into its socket, only to bulge out again, tethered by a vein that pulsed erratically. He clawed at the walls, desperate to climb out, but the stomach churned and a torrent of black bile washed over him, forcing him down. Outside, faint and mocking, came Jerry's whistle, cheerful, carefree, as if the mouths were polishing his cheese while Tom suffered. The sack convulsed one last time, and the teeth reappeared, gnashing at the edges. They bit into him again, chewing him into a pulpy mass, then spat him out like a wad of soggy fur. He landed on the living room floor, a quivering heap, his body a distorted caricature, arms too long, spine twisted, face half melted, the whole pulse behind him, its edges curling into a grin, and the floor beneath began to crack, jagged lines spreading like veins. Tom whimpered, curling into himself, but the whistle grew louder, closer. Jerry wasn't done with him yet. The living hole had only been a taste of the horrors to come, and the shadows of the room stretched toward him, hungry for more. Tom lay sprawled on the cracked floor, his body a mangled wreck from the living hole's torment. His fur hung in wet, tattered clumps, his legs twisted like broken twigs, and his single bulging eye stared blankly at the ceiling, tethered by a pulsing vein. The room trembled, the fissures in the wood widening, and from the largest crack emerged a shape, an old television, its boxy frame rusted and dented, its screen flickering with static. It rose as if pulled by unseen strings, the antenna twitching like insect legs. Tom flinched, dragging himself backward, but the screen flared to life, casting a sickly gray glow across his trembling form. The static cleared, revealing a familiar scene. Tom atop a cliff, lighting a stick of dynamite, his grin wide and cocky. It was an old memory, one of his countless failed traps. On screen, Jerry scampered away, and the dynamite exploded in Tom's face, blackening his fur and flattening him into a pancake. He winced, remembering the sting, but then the air grew heavy and the screen rippled. A force yanked him forward, his claws scraping uselessly against the floor, and he was sucked into glass, his body stretching and distorting as he passed through. He landed on a cliff, the cartoon landscape vivid yet wrong. The sky a swirling mess of gray and red, the ground pulsing like flesh. The dynamite was in his paws again, lit and hissing. He dropped it, scrambling back, but it rolled after him, impossibly alive. The explosion hit, and this time it wasn't funny. His fur burned away, his skin split, and his bones shattered into dust, the pain searing through him with a clarity no cartoon ever held. He screamed, but the scene reset, his body reformed, charred and trembling, only to face the dynamite again. Each blast was worse, peeling him apart layer by layer, his cries drowned by the looping boom. The screen flickered, shifting to another memory. Tom beneath the piano, its strings glinting as it fell. He tried to run, but his legs buckled, still warped from the hole, and the piano crushed him flat. His ribs snapped, his organs burst, and his tongue lolled out, tasting the ink that pooled around him. He reformed, gasping, only to see the piano lift and drop again, an endless cycle of flattening agony. The television laughed, a distorted, tinny sound that echoed inside his skull. Then Jerry appeared, not in the scene, but on the screen surface, his form drawn in crude, jagged lines. His black eyes stared through the glass, and his paws pressed against it. Stretching the screen like rubber, the glass bulged in hands, dozens of them, burst out, two-dimensional yet solid, their fingers tipped with claws. They grabbed Tom, tearing at him. One ripped his dangling eye free, the vein snapping with a wet pop. Another tore his ear, the flesh curling like paper. He clawed the ground, but the hands dragged him closer, the screen oozing black ink that burned his wounds. The television began to leak, the ink pooling around him, scalding his fur into blisters. He thrashed, but the scenes kept playing, falls, explosions, crushings, each one reliving his flesh, the pain stacking until his mind frayed. The hands pinned him, forcing his face against the glass, and he saw the audience. Countless Jerrys, identical, their grins stretching beyond their faces, laughing in unison. The sound drilled into him, a chorus of mockery that made his ears bleed. He begged for it to stop, but his voice was gone, swallowed by the static. The screen pulsed one final time, spitting him out onto the living room floor. He collapsed, a quivering heap, his body a mosaic of scars and burns, his missing eye socket weeping ink. The television loomed above, its glow dimming, but the laughter lingered, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. Jerry's whistle cut through it, sharp and close, and Tom knew the next torment was already waiting, coiled in the shadows of this endless nightmare. Tom hit the floor with a wet thud, his body a ruin of burns and scars from the television's torment. His fur was singed to stubble, his missing eye socket oozed black ink, and his limbs twitched as if barely tethered to his frame. The living room was silent for a moment, the television's glow fading into cracked wood, until the air thickened with a new weight. The shadows stretched, coiling upward, and from their depths rose a table, an endless expanse of polished mahogany, its surface gleaming under a chandelier that flickered with no source. Plates piled high with food materialized, golden fish, wedges of cheese, steaming sardines, a feast fit for a king. Tom's stomach growled, a hollow ache cutting through his pain, and he dragged himself toward it. He climbed onto a chair, his warped paws slipping on the velvet cushion, and reached for a fish. Its scales glinted, crisp and inviting, but as his teeth sank in, the taste was wrong, salty, metallic, alive. He gagged, spitting out, and saw his own tail staring back at him, fried and glistening, the stump on his backside twitching in sync. His eyes widened, darting to cheese. It wasn't cheese at all, but his whiskers coiled into pale, greasy spirals, still trembling as if plucked moments ago. The sardines were his claws, breaded in dripping oil, their jagged edges curling inward. He retched, but the hunger gnawed deeper, an insatiable void that forced his paws back to plate. Each bite was torture. The tail crunched like bone, splintering in his mouth, and he felt the phantom pain of it tearing free again. The whiskers slid down his throat, wriggling like worms, and the claws lodged in his gums, drawing blood that mixed with the ink already staining his tongue. He tried to stop, but his paws moved on their own, shoveling the grotesque meal into his maw. The table groaned, and the plates refilled, his ears roasted and curled, his fur baked into crackling strips. His own heart, still beating, served raw on a silver platter. He sobbed, choking on himself, but the hunger only grew, a ravenous beast inside him. A shadow loomed at the table's far end, and Jerry emerged, transformed. His body was impossibly long, a serpentine stretch of brown fur, supported by spider-like legs that clicked against the floor. His eyes glowed like twin spotlights, and his grin split his face into a jagged crescent. He sat regal and monstrous and began to eat. His dish was a whole cat. Tom recognized the gray fur, the tattered ears. It was him, or a version of him, roasted and glistening. The roasted Tom mewed faintly as Jerry's teeth sank in, tearing off chunks with a wet rip. Blood pooled on the table, and Jerry chewed slowly, savoring each bite, his eyes locked on the real Tom. The table quivered, coming alive. The plates sprouted limbs, Tom's severed paws, skittering across the wood, dragging their contents toward him. His roasted ears flopped onto his lap, his fur strips wrapped around his neck like a scarf, tightening until he wheezed. The heart pulsed faster, losing red, and rolled into his paws, forcing him to clutch it. He bit into it involuntarily, and it burst, flooding his mouth with a bitter flood that burned his throat. Ink erupted from his stomach, spilling from his lips, but it crawled back inside, a living liquid that gagged him as it returned. Jerry's laughter joined the chaos, low and guttural, shaking the chandelier until its crystals fell, shattering around Tom like glass rain. The feast wouldn't end. The table stretched further, the food multiplying, his bones, his eyes, his shredded soul served up in endless portions. Tom's body bloated, his skin stretching taut. Yet he remained hollow, the hunger unquenched. Jerry leaned forward, his spider legs tapping a rhythm, and whispered something unintelligible, a sound that burrowed into Tom's mind. The cat collapsed, clawing his distended belly, as the shadows of the banquet closed in, promising no reprieve. Only more of himself to consume forever. Tom sprawled across the floor, his body a grotesque monument to the banquet's horrors. His belly bulged unnaturally, stretched tight over a writhing mass of self-devoured flesh, while ink dribbled from his mouth, staining his patchy fur. His single eye rolled in its socket, the other a gaping hole weeping black tears, and his limbs splayed like broken marionette strings. The table dissolved into shadow, leaving only silence, until the air shivered and a new shape rose from the cracked wood. A mirror, towering and warped, its frame twisted like molten metal, its glass rippling as if breathing. Tom whimpered, too weak to crawl away, as the reflection flickered into view. It wasn't him, not exactly. The Tom in the mirror grinned, a wide, toothy maw that stretched beyond his face, his eyes gleaming with manic joy Tom had never known. The reflected Tom laughed, a high-pitched cackle that pierced the silence, and raised a paw to wave. Then Jerry appeared beside him, cartoonishly crude, his claws glinting as he plunged them into the mirrored Tom's chest. The reflection didn't flinch. It laughed harder, blood spurting in arcs as Jerry tore it apart, shredding fur, snapping bones, gouging eyes. Tom stared, frozen, as the scene looped. Dismemberment, laughter, reformation, over and over, a grotesque comedy playing in the glass. The mirror pulsed, and the reflection stepped out. Its paws left wet prints of ink on the floor, its grin unwavering as it grabbed Tom's arm. He screamed, clawed at the ground, but the doppelganger's grip was iron, dragging him toward the glass. The surface stretched like rubber, swallowing him whole, and he landed in a void of swirling gray. The mirrored Tom loomed above, still laughing, and the torture began. A big emblem dropped from nowhere, flattening Tom's legs into a pulpy mess, the pain a white-hot spike through his spine. He reformed, gasping, only for knives to rain down, slicing him into ribbons, each cut burning as if dipped in acid. The void shifted, and he was stretched. Ropes tied his limbs, pulling until his joints popped and his muscles tore, his body elongating into a grotesque caricature. He snapped back together, only to be crushed again, this time by a safe, its metal door slamming shut on his skull. Each torment was a memory of his old traps, twisted into nightmares, and through it all, the mirrored Tom laughed, its voice echoing inside his head, drowning his screams. Jerry joined in, his form multiplying, dozens, hundreds of Jerrys, lining the edges of the void, their grins stretching into infinity, their black eyes unblinking. The audience clapped, a thunderous sound that shook the glass walls of his prison. Tom's doppelganger grabbed his face, forcing him to watch as it peeled his own skin away, revealing a writhing mass of ink and flesh beneath, still laughing. The real Tom's voice was gone, stolen, replaced by the cackling that poured from the mirror. He clawed at his throat, but his paws were useless, trembling stumps. The Jerrys leaned closer, their laughter a physical force, pressing into him, cracking his ribs, bursting his eardrums until blood trickled from his ears. The mirror pulsed one last time, spitting him back into the living room. He collapsed, a shivering heap, his body a warped ruin, legs bent backward, arms too long, face half melted into a rictus of pain. The mirror loomed above, reflecting not him, but the endless audience of Jerrys, their applause a deafening roar. He understood now. Jerry wasn't just his tormentor. Jerry was the architect, the god of this animated hell, a force that had always lurked behind the mouse's smug grin. Tom's obsession had birthed his eternity, and there was no escape. Only the cycle of suffering, written in ink and laughter. The room darkened, the mirror sinking into the floor, but Jerry's whistle lingered, sharp and cheerful, cutting through the silence. Tom curled into himself, his single eye staring into the void as the shadows closed in. The chase was over. The punishment was forever, and somewhere in the depths of this twisted plane, Jerry watched, Asobio echoing like a final, mocking him.